Morning. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to BITC's Cost of Living Campaign Supporting Suppliers event. We're very pleased to have you here this morning. I can see people are slowly joining. We've got a fair number already in the room. So I'm going to kick off. I'm Maya D'Souza and I'm BITC Circular Economy Director. And we've been working on procurement issues and looking at how to support supply chain decarbonisation, which is why this is of particular interest. And we've worked closely with our cost of living campaign team, including Emma Gage, who I'll introduce you to later on. So as you probably all know, if we can move to the next slide, and I'll show you the agenda for today. So what we are looking at today is what it is that members can do to support their suppliers during this cost of living crisis. We're going to have insights from three really good speakers from our membership, Caroline Howarth from Enterprise Rent a Car, Andrew Brown from Anglian Water, and Wendy Story from Suez. And then we'll have a panel discussion. So that will be with the panel, but I'd like to encourage people to throw in questions so we can make the whole exercise interactive. So please start thinking of your questions as we go along. We realise that the whole issue of supporting suppliers, what you need to do, how do you do it, etc., is not an easy one. So please feel free to ask any questions at all and tell us about your challenges as well. So just moving on to the next slide. To remind you, BITC has developed this cost of living action plan for business, and it has 4 different headings: supporting employees, customers, communities, and suppliers. And the suppliers one, as you will see, includes one action, which is, in theory at least, quite straightforward: prompt and fair payment to suppliers. And then the other 2 are connected with the nexus between reducing costs, so financial efficiency, as well as the environmental benefits of energy and resource use. So we're very much trying to show how one can streamline, increase efficiency, increase supply chain resilience, as well as have some wider benefits. So this is not something that's generally done, but we can see action that is underway, and that is what we'd like to increase the momentum behind that and understand how to do it. So moving on to our next slide. These are the main themes we're expecting to come out of the discussion. So around prompt and fair payment, also, as I mentioned, on resource and energy cost, but also we're interested in any other actions being taken to support suppliers in this cost of living crisis. There may well be other things that people are doing which we're not aware of. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is move on to our first panelist, who is Caroline Howarth from Enterprise Rent a Car. So I can see myself on the screen, but I can't see Caroline as yet. Oh, there's Caroline. Okay. So, I mean, just to remind people, what we've seen over the last year or so is increasing cost of energy and other resources. So that's putting a lot of pressure on suppliers, on small suppliers, perhaps in particular, and a lot of them we hear feel sort of, at risk, threatened, perhaps unable to continue. But we've seen some companies that have taken some bold steps to try and support their suppliers. So I'm going to begin this discussion asking Caroline a couple of questions, but essentially so that, Caroline, you can tell us a little bit more about what you've been doing at Enterprise Rent a Car. So the first question is, what steps have you taken to improve the payment terms? And then I'm keen to understand the barriers and challenges you faced in doing so. So over to you, Caroline. And thanks very much for joining us, and thanks very much for providing us with your insights and knowledge.
Good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me today. At Enterprise Rent-A-Car, I'd say we've always been a strong advocate, to be perfectly honest, in prompt payment terms. Certainly to our suppliers, we've typically set up vendors to be 30, 60-day payments, but certainly more recently, we've obviously had or felt pressure from a lot of our suppliers to want payment terms more timely, quicker. So some of them we've worked on, we've moved those to 30, some we've changed to be due now. But I think we work with a number of body shops, a number of small independents as well, so predominantly sole traders, etc. But we also specialize with HGVs, and we also build and spec vehicles for certain customers upon their request. So I think we've certainly been challenged more with our bodybuilders, for example, I'd say these last 12 months. Typically, how we approach that today is, we'll put an order in for a HGV chassis, we'll take delivery from with the dealer, that'll arrive, but then it'll get moved across to a bodybuilder who would then bodybuild the remaining parts of the truck, the lorry, etc., whether it be refrigeration. And from there on, really, they'll spend then the time to build it. Then once completed, they'd then move it back to the dealer. We still won't pay the bodybuilder, for example, until that vehicle was in our physical possession, transferred into and registered under Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and that could be some months down the line before we paid them. But what we started to notice, and we were listening to the field, we were receiving feedback. Once we started putting in more orders, and we were finding that there were delays in getting our vehicles built, for example. So the people on the ground, would be having conversations, what's going on. We'd even have some bodybuilders that, well, naturally just didn't necessarily want to do our work. And what it came down to really was the fact that they were looking for people who would pay more timely. We weren't probably a priority for them, because they would then prioritize work, for example, where they could get payment terms that were much more quicker. So that had obviously a knock-on effect to our business. So we then had to get all the key stakeholders together, work out, what is it that's delaying the payment? Why did we implement it that way? There were barriers, because it was a case of that's what we've always done. So we walked through the journey for a vehicle from order to receipt, and we started looking at, okay, so what's our exposure? Where can we mitigate any risk if we were to improve the payment terms for bodybuilders? We'd also experienced a bodybuilder go into administration because they couldn't pay the landlord. And so then the landlord had locked up, we had 12 vehicles locked up at one point. So it was starting to create an awful lot of noise, and it was having a negative impact on our business, because obviously we had customers to service as well who'd signed contracts for these vehicles. So all the key stakeholders, we were all in a room, we walked through the process, looked at where we can make those improvements. We came up with a plan. We went to the key bodybuilders who would rely upon the most, and they felt comfortable with our improved terms as well. So yeah, we've been operating just under different slightly payment terms to what we've done. We've probably improved it by about 45 days, to be perfectly honest, 30 to 45 days for these bodybuilders. That's really, helped encourage them want to do enterprises work and prioritize us, because we were then seen as a reliable payer rather than someone who they had to wait in order to get cash flow from us as Enterprise. So that's a couple of things that we've done. We've worked with our outsourced partners as well in terms of car preps. The labour market, for example, was obviously seeing a rate minimum wage increase, living wage increases as well. And the labour rate that we were paying to our outsourced partners to supply car preps, for example, we were starting to lose people working for this particular company. So again, we were starting to see no-shows, people turning up late. We weren't able to get the staff. So again, we sat down with the company who supplies us with our car preps. They walked us through the challenges that they were experiencing. They were losing staff because they were going and working for other companies, competitors, because they were receiving a higher labour rate. And so again, in turn, you know, we were very amicable, and we understand, you know, when we can't always be paying everybody as they want. However, we were probably, you know, we went through in terms of, this is more of a hindrance to our business, and this is something that we need to sort, because obviously if we don't have the car preps turning the vehicles around, putting out a vehicle that's clean as our customers are expecting, that has a negative impact on us. It's the service that we recognise ourselves and our brand and reputation for. So it was starting to see detrimental impact on our business. So again, we agreed increased labour rates that we would pay to our outsourced partners. And that seems to be, touch wood, so far going well, and has helped reduce the noise. We now know that we've got staff that are turning up guaranteed, turning up on time, etc. So there's a few things that we've done. Those are just some of the key examples that we've done that's certainly had a benefit to our business, because if we hadn't, I think we'd be in a whole different world right now.
Right, thanks very much, Caroline. So what it seems to me in your case is improving the payment terms made absolute business sense. It was a sort of common sense response. It went hand in hand with sort of supporting your suppliers. But I wonder whether there were any challenges. Did you have any difficulty persuading people, your CFO, or was it?
I'm in a very fortunate position because I am one of the key decision makers. So for myself, it was more a case of what I'd set down the expectations for my team to bring to me, for us to make it and me feel comfortable in saying yes. So there'd been pushback a number of times. We'd looked at other competition as well to go and do the work at a cheaper rate, for example. And sometimes it's better the devil you know that understands your business. So we have, and I certainly have pushed back in trying to outsource elsewhere, but it actually came down to that it's actually having a negative impact on our own business today. And I'd rather keep those ones that have been loyal to us in the past as well and continue to support those suppliers.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, Caroline. Thanks for bringing out those themes. And I like those themes of maintaining those local suppliers that you've got good relationships with and trust. And I think that is an important part of supporting suppliers. And just to throw in a conversation I had at an event we held on Monday, that came out as well with some construction material suppliers, that if you lose those relationships with your trusted local supplier, you can end up with actually not having enough suppliers, not enough competition, and lose some important relationships. So pay good terms, not pushing your suppliers too hard and squeezing down prices makes business sense, as well as supporting people that can be vulnerable in this current economic situation that we're in. So thank you. And I'm now going to invite our next speaker, who is Andrew Brown from Anglian Water Services. So very different sort of business, Andrew, and very different set of suppliers, because I expect you have a lot of very big suppliers who are construction companies and quite different from the ones that we were just hearing about. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions here and bring in some of the other themes that we mentioned on supporting suppliers. So the first one for me is around the energy, the sort of carbon, reducing the embodied carbon of the materials you use, so the resource efficiency. And what I'd like to understand is what you've done and how that has stacked up in terms of environmental benefits, but also in terms of cost, where you are able to increase financial efficiency as well as reduce carbon.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Yeah, and I guess building on some of the conversation that you've already had, I think kind of relationships with suppliers is really, really important in this. It is about building kind of long-term relationships, because only then can you get into the understanding of the kind of the opportunities for kind of true collaboration. So you're right, from our perspective, we've worked kind of intensely with our supply chain over the last 10, 13 years or so, since we set some really hard targets on carbon. We realized that, you know, carbon and climate change was one of the biggest risks we faced, and we wanted to set some really hard targets. But if we were going to try and drive carbon out of our business, we couldn't do that without the supply chain being an absolutely integral part of that. And some of that is about kind of helping to just raise awareness and help people understand why it's such an issue, but also kind of putting the governance processes, all the kind of really dull stuff kind of in the background, which kind of drives decisions and behaviour towards lower carbon options. And as I said, we put some kind of hard targets in place when we kind of started out on this journey. And we were trying to initially halve the amount of carbon kind of embedded in the things that we were building. And people tend to think about the water industry as, you know, we take water, we treat it, we put it into pipes and supply it. But actually we are, as you're right, you know, major construction, kind of big capital program. And yeah, you know, the vast majority of our spending is with those kind of entities. But over the last 10 years or so, we've seen the carbon in the assets reduced by 63% from the 2010 baseline. And that's been really, really, you know, down to working closely with our suppliers. And I think, you know, what we're now starting to see leading on from that is the opportunity for the suppliers to understand that, you know, not only does that build a deeper, better relationship with us going forward, and therefore, you know, much more likely to kind of stay kind of connected with us, but if they can see how you can drive carbon out in the things that we want, they can see how they can drive carbon out of the things that they need, that they're doing as well. And earlier on this year, we had a climate for change event where we brought together, I think it was about 63 representatives from our supply chain, just, you know, almost to go back to basics, because, you know, there'd been a lot of other, you know, a lot of other activity in the world over the last couple of years, and the kind of climate crisis was slightly falling off the agenda, and we wanted to re-emphasize the importance of that and the absolute necessity of our supply chain working with us on that. Yeah, so we brought them together in London for an event back in February. And we had Chris Starkey from the Committee on Climate Change kind of setting out the context, but then we had our CEO talking about why it was important for us. And then we had kind of other speakers from different industries talking about how they were driving carbon kind of out of the way they constructed products, but also delivered services. And, you know, getting together and having that kind of conversation is really, really important. But what's, you know, better is then to follow that on with some activities and action, just as you want to do from this kind of conversation today. And so whenever we hold those kind of events, we don't like to let people off kind of scot-free. We get them to sign up to doing something as a result of that. And there were 4 kind of major work streams that we got people to sign up to. And we are we're starting to see some kind of activity as a result of that. And we're not going to let it go. We're going to keep going back to the supply chain and say, well, okay, you signed up to that particular work stream, whether that was collaboration or an innovation work stream. And so what have you been doing? And you know, how can we work together on something? And in fact, I've got a meeting this afternoon with one of our major suppliers to see where they are in terms of the kind of follow-up from it.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Andy. That was really really sort of illuminating and insightful into how you go about working with your suppliers. So it's not just a question of sort of behind closed doors and having discussions and negotiations, but you're actually bringing them into sort of events, having an open dialogue. And I like that idea of people going away with something, a sort of commitment, or, you know, whether it's to collaboration or innovation. So I'd say that that's one of the things that we should be encouraging our members to do, to engage with their suppliers in this sort of way, potentially. Would you say it has been, you know, beneficial in terms of throwing up new ideas and ways of doing things?
Absolutely, yeah. And you know, one of the other things we do is reward and recognise suppliers, when they're doing fantastic things, and they are all doing fantastic things, whether it's to do with climate change or whether it's to do with health and safety or well-being in their organisation. We like to see what they're doing and listen and learn from them as well. So we hold an annual suppliers awards event where we ask all our suppliers, and we ask people in our business to nominate suppliers who have done something exceptional during the year. There are categories for environment awards, carbon neutrality awards, innovation awards, efficiency awards, health and safety, well-being, all sorts of things. And that was actually held last month at Rutland Water, and they came for the day. We listened to all of the best practice. We celebrated the winners, and everyone was shortlisted. But we also have that as an opportunity then to talk about some of the other topics of real interest to us. So again, we had a market stall on climate change and carbon. We had a stall on well-being and health and safety. We had a stall on community engagement and investment. So it's a real opportunity to build that relationship.
Okay, great. I'm going to ask you one final question. Hopefully the answer you give me is the right one. It may not be, which is, did your efforts at saving embodied carbon also save you money?
Yes, yeah. And that's a really interesting point, because when we first set the target in 2010, the kind of conversation around the room was, okay, you want to halve the amount of carbon in your assets within 5 years was the first target. How much more do you want to spend on that? And that was very much, no, you've misunderstood. We want to hit our kind of financial efficiencies and save carbon. So it was that kind of step change that really, having that hard target was what created the kind of step change in innovation. And we did see a reduction in cost. So, if you think about carbon as effectively it's a proxy for resource efficiency. So if you can strip, if you can think about doing things in different ways, if you can refurbish rather than build something new, if you can be using recycled materials rather than virgin materials, we did see cost coming off all the way through. But what we're now seeing is that, as I said, we hit our target of 63% reduction in the last year. It is getting harder and harder now. But that's when we want to kind of encourage, the disruptors, the innovators out there kind of in the world to come forward with something new that we don't know about. We're always really interested in testing new systems and new approaches.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thanks very much, Andy. That's really, really great. Good to hear. Hopefully good message everybody can take away with them as well. And now I'm going to move on to our next speaker, who is Wendy Story from Suez. So Wendy, you'll be telling us a little bit about Suez's sort of journey, both in terms of supporting suppliers and more generally, as well as your work on resource efficiency. So thanks very much for joining us today. So would you like to begin by telling us a little bit about how you're supporting suppliers generally who are facing increasing costs?
Yes, one of the biggest areas for us recently has been our hauliers. So we spend about 50 million a year with hauliers, and a lot of them are actually quite small and medium-sized companies. And we have long-term contracts with them with annual indexation in. Where we raise the price or raise the prices. But when the Ukraine war started, the fuel prices started going crazy. Some of them came to us and said it just wasn't sustainable to keep their prices at the agreed indexation for the rest of the year. So we discussed with them, and we realized that it just wasn't fair basically for these smaller companies to take the burden. So we introduced a monthly fuel surcharge where we'd look at the fuel price and increase or decrease when it goes down the price according to what the fuel surcharge is. And they were very pleased with this, and I think it reflects what Caroline was saying earlier, that these are partnerships with our suppliers. It's no point to us having suppliers that are going to be go to the wall and go into administration if they can't financially survive. So it doesn't help us in any way. We are a large company, and so we took the hit on this. We didn't pass it back to our customers. Again, we have long-term contracts with them with annual price indexation. So we took the hit on the haulage petrol and the haulage diesel costs. Other things we've done, as Mayor asked about resource efficiency, we've also looked at reducing our own resources by introducing electric cars, moving over to alternative fuels and electric mobile plant, introducing light LEDs at all our sites. And again, all of these have reduced our costs in the long term, as well as reducing the carbon. So there's been some huge advantages there, and we're just constantly looking for new ways of doing this, and also talking to our suppliers about how they can do this as well. Again, looking at our haulage suppliers, we're looking at whether they can move to like HVO and alternative fuels as well, and how we can support them in this. A final thing we've done is we've reduced some of the payment terms for our very small suppliers, particularly things like catering companies, where they have to buy all the ingredients obviously first. So we've reduced a lot of payment terms for the very small organisations as well. And it's interesting to hear what Andrew was saying about awards. This is something we introduced 2 years ago, and we've done 2 years of supplier awards. It sounds like very similar categories to Andrew, with looking at protecting the environment, social value, health, safety and well-being, innovation and collaboration. And we like to work with suppliers that support us and go over and above. And it's great to reward and recognise these suppliers with an award each year and a ceremony. So there's still loads more that we can do, but it's been an interesting 2 years.
Okay, great, Wendy. Thanks very much. And I can see some common themes coming out of what people have been saying. So one is around business resilience, and so your monthly fuel surcharge, your payment supported your business resilience. So you took a bold step that was beneficial to everyone. Also the thinking around investing in energy efficiency or improving your energy efficiency, in effect also supporting financial efficiency. And I like the idea that you actually didn't only think about your own, but thinking about your supply chain as well, because that is an area that we think that there is a lot of potential where the bigger companies may support the smaller ones who don't really have the time and resource to think hard about it. And you've used things like awards. Now I wanted to come to a slightly different angle, which is some of the work that you've done with us at BITC. So these joint statements of demand, and perhaps you can tell us a little bit about how you see them as improving efficiency more generally. Perhaps before you do that, I should tell people what a joint statement of demand is. So BITC has worked to develop a set of asks in 2 different areas, which are around office furniture and workwear, so that people going out to procurement can use a sort of common set of broad requirements. They're more principles rather than specifics. And the idea is by sort of signing up now and saying, this is what we're going to ask for in the future, suppliers can go away and invest and innovate, knowing that's what people are going to ask for. But over to you, Wendy, now, how do you see this panning out and benefiting people?
Yes, it was a really interesting project to be involved in, the joint statement of demand for textiles, because I think 90% of corporate workwear ends up in landfill, which is a shocking statistic. And by doing this, we've set out our demands, and I've already gone and spoken to our current clothing manufacturer about what they can do. And I think just by setting out what we want, it does change their mindset as well. And they've already come to us with a new high-vis polo shirt, which is made from recycled polyester. And can be recycled again at the end of use. And it's just, I think, especially as larger companies, but smaller companies can do as well, is just you just keep asking the questions and keep saying this is what we want, and then prioritizing it when we go out to tender. But I definitely think it's already sparked change, and it's only just been launched. So yeah, it's been fantastic.
Yeah. Okay, very pleased to hear that. And perhaps we put it on the chat, the joint statements demand in the chat, because the more people that sign up to these joint statements, the better. They're giving a message to the market, and it's good to see that innovation beginning to happen. So we're now going to move on to the panel section. So as I said, we've got three main themes that we're trying to draw out today. So I'm going to go back to the first one, which is around prompt payment. Now, prompt payment is something that sort of almost everyone knows needs to be done, but it can be harder to do than one may expect. So just beginning with you, Wendy, I mean, how are you dealing with prompt payment, and have you managed to sort of improve terms?
Yes, and it's actually not just about improving the terms, but actually paying to term. Do you know what I mean? I think if suppliers know when they're going to be paid, they can often manage their cash flow. We introduced a new purchase to pay system last year, which is much better, and it gives the suppliers greater transparency because they have an app where they can see where their invoice. They basically get the purchase order, they can turn that into an invoice on the app, and then they can track where it is. I often think when suppliers send an invoice in, it can kind of go to a black hole in an organization, whereas here they can actually see when it's going to be paid and see if there's any issues with it that they need to resolve. So that has helped a lot, and I think since we've introduced that, our payment on time statistics have definitely improved. We have to report, as most large companies do, on where we're paying on term, and it does improve all the time.
Okay.
There's still work to be done with getting people to GRN orders on time, but that's a separate issue.
Right. Okay. And Andy, that I think that's an area that you've also been doing some work on in Anglian. Can you tell me a little bit about work you've been doing in terms of, sort of supplier codes and payments?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have to say firstly, yeah, I mean, very much like Wendy was saying, I mean, we made a real effort during the pandemic actually to support suppliers through that. I mean, it's very much the same now. We saw a real improvement in the kind of speed at which we pay, and that's been kind of maintained all the way through now, which is good. And I think going back to the relationship point, we're all we're open to conversations with suppliers who might be in particularly difficult circumstances or need some support. So we're open to conversations about that. Yeah, the other thing we're doing at the moment is we're just reviewing our sustainability supply chain code of conduct. So yeah, that's in the very final stages of its review and release. But yeah, we've taken the opportunity in that to think again about trying to demonstrate the connection between some of the big risks that we face and that we're trying to deal with on behalf of our customers, and the opportunities for supply chain to kind of deliver on those, whether that be carbon, whether that be kind of environmental improvements, whether that be innovation and the opportunity to kind of disrupt the current the current kind of supply chain.
Right. Yeah, thanks. And I'm going to move on to that topic. I know, Caroline, you've told us a fair bit about what you've been doing on the actual payment. So I'm just going to move on to this energy and resource efficiency issue, because what we know is that there are a lot of energy efficiency improvements that are possible. There has been progress in some areas like using LED light bulbs, but still more that can be done in terms of everything from maybe even what temperature you heat a building to, or equipment that's used. Resource efficiency is slightly more tricky in Anglian's sort of construction context. You can see that you use less concrete potentially, or less steel. But I'm going to bring in Wendy and Caroline as well into this discussion. So it's a bit of a challenge, but how do you think we could really try and use resources more efficiently across the whole supply chain and save costs? I'm going to go to you, Wendy, to begin with, because you've started talking about the joint statements of demand and clothing and workwear. So do you see that as something which could help build efficient financial efficiency as you go along?
Yes, definitely. And I think there's a lot of work we need to do internally on that. You know, we have a lot of sites and a lot of people, and sometimes everyone has their own stores of stuff, and I think we need to be making sure that across the sites we're making sure we're making the most of what we've got, so people don't have 10 t-shirts stacked up in one site and someone else is buying a whole load of new one in a different site. We need to have a better transparency internally on that. We also need to look at, and this was a difficult one with the joint statement, of doing things like reuse. And I think that's particularly difficult with workwear, probably possibly easier with furniture. But there are things that there are some hard challenges, but you need to be able to at least start questioning it and looking at alternative ways. And so, yeah.
Yeah. And Caroline, you may want to comment on this as well, but yeah, reuse sometimes can be, it may be quite challenging to people's mindset. So people may feel the new is obviously better. You know, we don't want a secondhand uniform or secondhand furniture. Clearly, we want something shiny and new. So, Caroline, I wonder what your thoughts are on trying to sort of bring in resource efficiency into the way we work.
Yeah, this is probably something that we're only really touching the surface with and starting, to be perfectly honest. But we've, you know, in certainly a lot of our locations and our head offices, for example, we've switched out all the lighting to the LEDs. Certainly we've decided, you know, signage, you know, switching those off on an evening as opposed to having them lit throughout the entire night. So there's a few small changes. We've looked at recycling units for water, for cleaning our vehicles, so that we're reusing water, but that's trickier because it's trying to find the right product, if that makes sense. So these are still in its infancy stages, really. I wouldn't say we've got these in all of our locations, probably a small percentage, to be perfectly honest, but it's all a case of trial and error and seeing what works, because, you know, ultimately what we're trying to do, we've got all good intentions to do that. We can't have it obviously have an impact on the service that we're providing as well. We've also gone to some dry cleaning facilities as well. So we're trying to clean the vehicles that probably are not as used as frequently as a daily rental car. We have what's called car clubs, so where they're like a 24-hour access, but they're parked on a street. So in the old days, we used to get the vehicle, return it to a branch, clean it, and then repark it. But now we're doing dry cleaning as well. So we're doing that on the streets. Certainly looking at solar panels. So some of the solar panels for some of our locations as well. We think there's a huge opportunity there. And something that we did a few years ago was we stopped purchasing any IT equipment, and we decided to lease IT equipment. So we're now paying for a maintenance contract. We lease all of our IT equipment, because what used to happen is everything used to end up just going in a room and in a closet and just staying there forever. So now it's very much more of a mindset that if something's not working correctly or broken, in order for you to get a replacement, you have to be getting a new one and sending the replacement back to the company that will lease it. That way they can do the recycling of the IT equipment, as opposed to we'll just buy a new one and then it goes to the IT graveyard, for example. So those are a few things that we've certainly been doing. But yeah, I'd say it's very early stages, and it's something that I think as a company, we can be doing a much better job of. Yes.
Right. Yeah, you said that, but I think at the same time, you seem to have done some really significant things here. And I'd say perhaps simply the rental car sort of service, which means that people may just hire a car as and when they need a car, in a way, is it perhaps isn't supporting suppliers, but it's supporting customers, and it's supporting. Mm-hmm. So that's, I think, a key thing to note in terms of resource 100%. Efficiency and the cost of living. And the other one is around the leasing the IT equipment. And perhaps Andy or Wendy would like to comment on that as well. But there seems to be a fair amount of potential from leasing equipment and relieving the ownership in the company who provides it to reduce costs.
Yeah, we do. We lease a lot of our mobile plant now as well. And then we're asking the company then to go move to alternative fuels and electric mobile plant. And that really goes. And I do think putting the onus on them is that they then come up with a program that when it's end of life for us of reusing the equipment themselves, which is really good. So yeah, we do the lease, and on our lighting as well. Our LED lighting is all leased as well. So it is a new way to look at these things.
Yeah. Okay, great. And Andy, would you like to comment on that at all? Do you?
Yeah, no, only to agree and say yes. You know, we switched our IT for exactly the same reasons Caroline was mentioning, and we're now, you know, that's all on a leased contract, which is a much more efficient and effective way of managing it.
Yeah. Okay, great. So I think we've got one sort of action that sort of comes out of this discussion, which people can go away and think about if they're not already doing it. Now, I wanted to pick up another theme that sometimes comes out in terms of energy efficiency and resource efficiency, which is that people often say, well, the savings are quite incremental, they're quite small compared to other things that can be done to reduce savings, and they're accrue year by year rather than immediately. But now with energy prices having sort of shooting up, at least for a while, coming down, I know they've come down to some extent as well. But are you beginning to see greater sort of wins from energy efficiency, at least, or potentially resource efficiency?
Yes.
We use these terms, when I'm saying energy efficiency and resource efficiency, I mean energy efficiency and material efficiency.
Yes, we definitely have, with particularly with the LED lighting and with moving to electric company cars. I think with both of those, what you need is to have the upfront initial investment ability to do that, and the infrastructure to put in. But then if you look at the total cost of ownership, the whole life costing, it definitely it pays back in the end.
Right. Okay. Yeah. No, that's my feeling. As things are moving on, they're becoming even stronger incentives to be energy efficient, and the price volatility itself means that if you want to have some sort of certainty, it'd be better to try and invest in energy efficiency. I'm going to see now if anybody has any questions in the. I don't see any questions in the chat. Would anybody like to come in at this point with a question? You can put it in the chat, but you can put your hand up as well. Okay. No, I'm just trying to read this question here. It sounds like enterprise and huge amount of listening. What do you think are the key cultural factors? Right. So, Caroline, going back to my colleague Emma. Emma, you've got your hand up. Emma, would you like to speak, if you don't mind, rather than me read the question?
Thanks, Maya. Sorry, I was spending that time trying to find the hand thing. But here I am. Yeah, I was just really struck by the kind of the cultural themes that are coming out alongside the practical action. And there was two things that kind of made me think that. There was the parts that you were sharing, Caroline, on all of the listening that you did, which led to the understanding of the business case. And then Wendy, you were talking about the kind of that piece internally of the fairness. As a larger organization, you knew that the costs were really going to impact smaller businesses. And that really intrigues me, because for me, that's a value of, there's a real fairness thing. That's so there's just like a couple of human themes that are coming up of the listening and the values and everything else that's sort of, for me, is a theme that's shifting the support for suppliers. So I'd love any reflections that you've got. And Andy, I know all of the collaboration you're doing, so it's clearly very embedded in Anglian Water's fundamental way of working with suppliers.
Yeah, I think it's, and Caroline said the similar thing, I think, about the fairness. We had some pushback from people internally saying, well, there's a contract, that's the price agreed, that's what you stick to. But ultimately, when you look at it, it's just whether it feels right or not. And you're right, it is a value, and it's a value of the company as well. I'm not sure what more I can say really, but I think it's almost just a conscience thing, whether the company has a conscience or not.
Right, okay. So yeah, I think that's a whole sort of idea of values and showing your values and communicating them, important for building trust potentially as well. So I think trust came out as quite important. We've got a different question here, which is from Carolina Richinskett. Carolina, would you like to put your question to people, or shall I read it out? Okay, I'm going to read it out unless I see you. Now I can't see you as yet, so let me read it out. So the question is, have any of you experienced any pushback from suppliers regarding sustainability? And if so, how did you deal with it? Does anybody, Andrew, do you want to come in on that? Andy, do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, I saw that come up in the chat, so I was just having a think about it. So I can't recall kind of a definite pushback. Suppliers saying no, they don't feel that they could do something, or they weren't going to kind of do something. What I have had in the last couple of weeks or so is one of our major suppliers coming to us and saying they don't think they're doing as much as they could do from a sustainability perspective, and could they have a conversation with us about how they rewrite their sustainability plan and make it much more client focused? So, what will make, they think they're bobbing along in the kind of center of the pack in terms of our tier one suppliers. How do they get themselves kind of right out in front? What would we be looking for, and what are the kind of key objectives from us? And I guess again that goes back to the relationship point. and some of our big suppliers, we work on a 5+5+5 year kind of contract, and that was a very deliberate thing because of the kind of scale of our investment program over the last 10 years and the next 5 years, was that we wanted to get beyond a kind of just a transactional relationship, and we wanted our biggest suppliers to really embed with us, and we call them alliances. And that's where we've seen some of the kind of best work kind of going above and beyond the kind of stuff we've been talking about today in terms of, carbon reduction and those kind of things, but really going, into groundbreaking stuff around place-based regeneration and, plugging some of the skills gap and creating, whole new education pathways. So not a pushback, but companies identifying that they don't think they're doing as well as they want to be, and how can we help them do that?
Okay, so that's really interesting. So Carolina, in fact, almost the opposite. Andy's seen suppliers actually want to be ahead of the game on sustainability, and I liked what you brought out there, which is that idea of shifting from a transactional relationship with suppliers to a very different relationship, which is one about sort of collaboration, really building those alliances. And I think that is an important theme that I'd like to draw out of this today, which is it's a way of working with suppliers which can be incredibly beneficial and can support innovation. So if you are really developing these close relationships, you talked earlier about having these things like conferences and sort of challenging people, getting them involved in different work streams. So I see that as really quite important in terms of shifting from the transactional relationship. So do either of you want to, Caroline, would you want to comment on that sort of idea of a transactional relationship and a collaborative sort of close relationship?
Yeah, I think when energy resources started increasing, and all industries were impacted by escalating energy prices, for example, but particularly for us, the body shop industry will probably hit the hardest, and that's more because of its intensive use of gas for spray booths. So we were having some pushback there in terms of what they were wanting to increase their costs to compensate for obviously the increased cost. But what we did is we worked with them again, and we offered an energy support fee. We made it temporarily so that for every vehicle that they repaired, we would give them an energy support fee. We made it temporary so that when changes you know, when prices did start to decline again, if they do, it's not something that was set in stone for everybody and can be removed. I mean, that started in October. We're still paying it today. But as a partnership, what we did was we got the body shops together, and this happened more recently, is to say, okay, they all came together, and our vehicle repair team was involved in the presentation where they were sharing best practices and examples of how they can reduce some of the resources that they're using from a body shop perspective. And they've been started on that roadmap today, where they've been trying to share some best practices to certainly cut down emissions that they're using, reduce energy, and probably help contribute so that they can work on saving some of the costs that they're seeing, and which will in turn obviously be a benefit for us as well also, because then we'll probably, you know, remove the energy support fee. But that's something that started only more recently because we've continued to pay it. So there's definitely been the collaboration where they've all come together. We've shared examples of how, you know, how you can reduce costs, how you can reduce energy resources, etc. And so that's something that's only really just been started in the last couple of months. So that's something that's still probably work in progress there.
Okay, great. So that's another angle on collaboration, a related angle in terms of bringing people together to suppliers. So they are, they're sort of sharing best practice. And I mean, BITC is very much an organisation which is about business collaboration. So we're really keen and pleased when we see those ways of working actually being really effective. And I'm going to use this opportunity to tell people a little bit about one of the things that we've been thinking about doing as an organisation. So in terms of how businesses operate, very often it's through a whole value chain. So it could be, if it's, say, Anglian Water, you'll have your, I think, constructing things is part of it, and water is another part of it, supplying water. But once it comes down to construction, then there'll be the sort of first tier contractors and the second tier contractors and the material suppliers. And in our thinking is that in order to create the change, which is both about resource efficiency as well as financial efficiency, you need to be working along these value chains. So everybody is doing what they are best placed to do. So it may be that you want a material supplier to be looking at providing reusable steel, you know, steel components that can be reused. You need to get your second tier contractors interested in buying that sort of stuff. You need to get your procurers at your end to be putting the right sort of thing in contracts. So we're looking to see if we can get some value chain projects going, which actually try and support resource efficiency, energy efficiency, and general sort of, you know, efficiency. And I wonder what the three of you as panelists think about that approach. Do you think that's a way of really trying to build efficiency into the system and get other benefits? Anyone want to offer to go first? Andrew, what about Andy? What about you, considering I was giving Anglian as an example there?
So apologies, I'm having some internet issues, so I don't even know if you can still hear me.
oh yeah, we can hear you. But I was talking about projects where BITC brings people together. So you've got your value chain, but it may be that Severn Trent has a similar value chain. So we're bringing people together to work on those common value chains.
Absolutely. No, I absolutely agree with that. And, you know, one of the things I think I'm particularly interested in is, you know, where are the circular economy opportunities in disrupting the supply chain? So, you know, where can we find existing suppliers or new suppliers that can, you know, come in and innovate with us to do things in a completely different way? You know, I think there's a real opportunity there for the future.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks very much, Andy. And I mean, Caroline, do you want, or Wendy, do you want to come in on that?
I don't disagree. I think anywhere where we can obviously come together to share best practices, ideas. I don't even necessarily think it needs to be in the same industry sometimes, because I think when you listen to what's going on, I mean, I've taken quite a few things from the Business in the Community Committee already, more recently in terms of what they've done. And, you know, there's no other car rental company there, but I think we're all faced with the, you know, same challenges. So I think any collaboration where we're sharing ideas, I think it's always going to be, I can't see why we wouldn't want to do that, to be perfectly honest. And how what somebody does for one thing, you might strike a chord to say, oh, actually, I could benefit from that. So it's, I think definitely the collaboration, I can't see why we wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, because we see potential in sort of bringing costs, dealing with the cost of living, as well as a number of other different important objectives here. So Wendy, would you like to come in on that one?
Yeah, I agree, and I think we're working with Slave Free Alliance with modern slavery, and we're in a working group with other people within our sector, and it works really well because you're often dealing with exactly the same suppliers, and we don't want to completely reinvent the wheel every time. So if you're coming up with a modern slavery questionnaire, why don't we all share the questionnaire? And you know, there's no competitive advantage in those kind of areas, so we just want everyone to be doing better. And it's the same with all this resource efficiency as well. We will benefit if all our suppliers are improving, and the earth will benefit as well. So yeah.
Okay, great. So we're close to the end, so I'm going to wrap up and give my colleague Emma Gage a moment to say a few words. But a lot of interesting themes have come out of the discussion, and I'm pleased to say that there has been a fairly strong view coming out that business resilience is closely linked with supporting suppliers. It does help to have good payment and other terms with suppliers in order to ensure business resilience, ensure you have those trusted suppliers. Another theme is that keeping costs down and energy and resource efficiency go together, and they shouldn't be seen as sort of competing objectives. You can do both, and with energy prices going up, that's particularly true. We've heard a lot about how people work with their suppliers and how to do so effectively in moving beyond transactional relationships, using things like conferences, building alliances, award schemes, partnerships with suppliers as well to share best practice, and sort of interest in, you know, working along value chains and across sectors as well to really develop knowledge and thinking. Those are just some of the ideas that have come out. I think it's been a very rich discussion and a lot of good points that our members can take away. Some are very specific as well, very practical ideas, like we talked about leasing IT equipment and reducing all that waste that ends up in some back room. And yeah, so a lot of potential in terms of reducing, increasing resource efficiency and making the most of products and materials. We didn't talk about things like giving things to charities, and Wendy, I know Suez has done some great work, so everything that isn't needed, or a lot of IT that isn't needed, ends up in the hands of people that really are in need of these sorts of electronic goods. So I'm going to leave it at that and hand over to Emma, who'll tell you about what's next at BITC. Over to you, Emma.
Thank you so much. I just want to say a huge thank you, Wendy, Andy, Caroline, Maya, and my colleague as well, Talia Simmons, behind the scenes, that has done so much to make this happen. Such an interesting discussion. The cost of living campaign is very much supporting employees, customers, communities, and suppliers. And one of the things that we've seen is that suppliers are getting left behind and receiving less support. So this was a really important event to highlight what businesses are doing, what you can do to really shift the dial. And for me, that human element of listening, conscience and business case really came across strongly. We've got so many events coming up. Keep tuned to our website, lots of content, loads of different case studies that are coming out. We'll be sharing this recording for any of your colleagues that didn't get a chance to join. And just a huge thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Thanks to all our panelists and participants. Thanks.
Thank you.
Goodbye from us all at BITC. Yeah.
Bye.